Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the HealthyPlace Instagram Live. It's National Suicide Prevention Week, and our first guest will be sharing her personal experiences with suicide and a suicide attempt and suicidal thoughts. And I mention that because it may be triggering for you. Also, if you need help, besides calling your doctor, therapist, or 911, you can also call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline at 800-273-8255. Also, on the HealthyPlace.com website, if you click resources in the top nav, you'll find lots of information on suicide and also helpline numbers. All right, before we start, if you have a question for our guest or a comment, or you want to share an experience, type it in the chat box and we will get to it as we go along. Let me bring on, let's see, where are you, Court? I just talked to her. I know she's here somewhere. There she is. Okay, our first guest, Court Rondelle. She lives with bipolar disorder, rapid sleeping, CPTSD, and is a survivor of child abuse and rape. She's also a Healthy Place blogger and writes for the Recovering from Mental Illness blog. So Court first started thinking about killing herself at 7, and that was followed by a suicide attempt at 11. And Court, thank you for joining us today. It's good to see you.
Hi, Kelly. Can you see me?
You're a little dark.
I'm a little dark. I'm totally dark on my screen.
Okay, well, we can see you a lot better than you can see yourself.
Okay. As long as you guys can see me, that's good. I have a light on me.
Okay, maybe it'll improve as we go on.
Okay.
So 7 years old is really young to be thinking about suicide. So what was going on at that time in your life, and what made you think about taking your own life?
Well, my environment was complete chaos. I was living with a very violent alcoholic father and untreated, battered. I mean, my mom was battered, and we ended up in the middle of rural Mexico with nobody to help us, and it was just a living nightmare. And that was the first time when I was 7. That was the first time I had a panic attack, and I disassociated from myself, like I left my body. And that was when it wasn't an active go get a knife and kill yourself, even though I do know other adult children who grew up in chaos that have had those thoughts as early as 6. Mine was, let's cross the street and not look, and maybe something will happen. And so I started taking risks and not really caring if I made it through, but it has always been because I haven't liked my reality, generally my internal reality, that I have wanted to die, but I haven't really wanted to die. I just want out of the pain. It's always been, I want out of the pain, and that seems like the most viable solution.
So a lot of people don't recognize wishing you were dead as a suicidal ideation, but are you saying it was for you?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's when it began. So it wasn't a super bold suicidal ideation, like here I am making a plan, but there was a lot of, like I could run into traffic. I could, fall off this wall. I could, I was in a pretty dangerous place to be. So maybe that's when I started taking really dangerous risks, because I have been a risk taker most of my life. And I do think there is, Natasha Tracy wrote a wonderful blog I read about this, about suicidality sometimes being that risk taking, like there's that line of, oh, I could die.
Yeah. Well, what made you at 11, what made you cross that line from I could to I'm going to try to do this?
I think when I was around 9, that's when I started really having full on suicidal visions and fantasies, because we finally escaped the violence of my father and we ended up in Reno, Nevada, and I ended up being extremely bullied and moving like 3 more schools. I was always the new kid. And the school that I ended up landing at was possibly the worst school I'd been at bully-wise. And I had a new dad all of a sudden, and we lived on the hill all of a sudden, and I had grown up poor, and all of a sudden I was the rich kid. It was a really weird time, and I was alone. I felt totally alone. I'd have like one friend, and then I'd have like one other friend who was also like my biggest bully. So who would like come home with me and then be like, I'm going to kill you, just all of a sudden like little twitches. So it was kind of like living with my father again. Mm-hmm. So I didn't feel like there was any escape from violence. So I decided to inflict it on myself. I remember at one point I did fantasize about, this is the only time I've ever fantasized about killing anyone, was killing my bully. And I had a whole plan to do it, and then I couldn't do it. And that's when I turned on myself. And that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to have to kill myself then. And then the next day I attempted.
That's horrible. It makes sense to me though how you went through those thoughts, especially as a young person. Today. Oh, before that, I want to ask you about the hospitalizations. Mm-hmm. You were hospitalized 3 times in your life. Yes. For suicidal ideation.
Yeah, it was. I don't know the terminology, but it was ideation with plan and intent. Mm-hmm. So essentially, I've only had, thank God, thank whatever, I've only attempted 1 time, and it was a feeble attempt because all of a sudden there was blood everywhere. It hurt. It scared the hell out of me. And I essentially wrapped it up and nobody found out. Nobody was the wiser. I have a little scar. And that was that, right? Which is the most dramatic thing because it's an actual attempt. But there were 3 times, and the first time was in 2006. So it was separate from the other 2, because the other 2 were when I had postpartum, and those were both in 2014. It was all for the same reason though. It was literally so I wouldn't kill myself. And because I've gotten to this point where I have gotten to too many times where there just are no other options. Now, in all reality, there are, but because my chemistry is so off, and because there will be circumstances, there have always been circumstances, but it's not like, oh, that's circumstantial depression, so it doesn't count. You can still kill yourself from circumstantial depression. It doesn't matter. It's like, I know when that thinking comes in, that something is amiss in my brain, because I have a neurological disorder. I have, I have bipolar type 1. I don't know if you probably already went over all that, and complex PTSD. So when that happens, I'm not right. So the first time, it just became the only option. And I got so scared of going through with my plan, because it was like all of a sudden I had, and it can be a very short window in between ideation and, plan, intent, doing, attempting. And I called a friend and told her my plan, and she threw me in the hospital, which was like the sweetest thing you can really do. And I've done it to other people, and it's really, really hard. It's really hard to do. But on the other end, they will thank you, hopefully. But I know it was, and that's when I was actually finally diagnosed with bipolar, and I was 33, I believe. And the other two times were similar, but more, it's like every time it feels more like I got in my car. I mean, I remember the very last one, before the last hospitalization, I got in my car and I went, let's do it. And I was on my way to the plan, on my way. And it was the day before Thanksgiving. My son was 3.5, and they had just started putting up the Christmas tree trailers at the college. And this is exactly what happened. Was it went, I'll ruin every single holiday for my child if I do this. And so again, that time I called my sister, and I said, this is what I'm going to do. And she said, no, you're not. I'm flying you home. And at that point, I was so sick at that point that I was no longer eating or sleeping. And I was the most severe depression I've ever had in my entire life. And it took a long time to bounce back from that. And I'm actually writing about that next week. The return from postpartum, because I was sick for 4 years. But I did get better. I did.
And we have a comment from Jackie26. She asks, are you scared that you may not be able to keep from going through with it?
Of course. Of course. Yeah. It's really, I was telling Kelly before, who, by the way, Kelly, thank you so much for having me. We just met, and I adore you. And I was telling her, last week, that I'm in a mixed episode right now, and I have been for about 2 months, and I have experienced extreme suicidal ideation that I haven't experienced like this in a long time. So, like, generally, I love doing interviews and I love talking about mental health, but I really like it when it's like really in my rear view, not. So I'm pretty much actively in it right now and treating with what's called TMS, Transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is what saved me the first time. Well, it was one of the many things that saved me the first time.
I'll talk about that treatment a little later, because a lot of people don't know about that yet. But I'm sorry that you have these thoughts all the time, and that you said you're in a bipolar mixed episode. So are the thoughts more frequent now, or what is it like on a normal day? Do you have suicidal thoughts daily, or?
I have had them off and on in the last 2 months. I would say at the most 4 days, 5 days in a row. And that is, it seems like, the 4 years that I went through, the last 2 years of that was constant suicidal, constant.
That's exhausting.
And to just go through 4 days, I'm like, I have no idea how I went through that. I have no idea, like, really. But what I did, exactly what I did last time, is I called a friend, or I call my psychiatrist and say, this is what's going on in my head. And
what do you think is the main, because you called your sister and you're good at reaching out when you feel this way, but a lot of people would get, sucked into the suicidal thoughts. And what do you think keeps you from succumbing to them? What makes you make that phone call?
it's always my son now. But the very first time before I had my son, when I was hospitalized, it was actually my husband. It's always the people in my life. But I have to say this because a lot of times you hear people say suicide is a selfish act. And I strongly disagree, because it is very hard for me to believe that anybody loves me or the world is going to be any worse for the wearer without me here when I'm in that state. And, I didn't reach out for years, or I would, but when it came down to it, but I would go, I would go weeks and weeks and weeks and have this, this thing going. But I think for me, when all of a sudden I know I'm going to do it, that's and it's grace that every time, and that I do have, like, I don't feel like I have a lot of people in my life when I'm depressed. I don't feel like I have a lot of friends. I don't feel lovable. So it's an even harder reach out to make. And then when they say, you can't do this, I love you, you cannot go away, you have to stay here, it feels like a death sentence, which isn't right. That's not the right word. It feels like a prison sentence. It feels like, but why do I have to stay here? Why? But it's because the idea is, I think part of it is that maybe somebody who doesn't have suicidal ideation wouldn't understand that it actually makes me feel better when I think about killing myself, because it releases some sort of something in my brain that goes, it's essentially like, I've been sober for 1,000,000 years. It used to be like, yeah, tonight I'm going to go get super drunk, And like,
Right.
and so I'd be like, yeah, work is awful today, and you're awful, and you're awful, and you just broke up with me, but I'm going to go get drunk. It's kind of that rationale of like, I'm out of here.
Well, you know what? I just saw a blog post on HealthyPlace the other day, and the title of it was Suicidal Ideation for Coping with Depression. And it sounds like that's what you're saying.
It's a coping mechanism. It's not a healthy one, but
Right.
It's a coping mechanism, and it's like automatically where my brain goes when I'm in that state. It's like the neural pathways are very deep toward suicide.
Monica says, I get suicidal thoughts all the time. Fighting against them constantly is exhausting. Would you agree with that?
It's absolutely exhausting. I hope that they pass. All I do is, when it's happening, is like throw everything at the wall. Like, what can I do to feel better? And sometimes no matter what I do, I don't feel better and they don't go away. And when that happens, when I'm in that and have been going through that very recently, it's like, okay, just today, I'm not killing myself. Just today. And I'll pull the day at a time trick with myself.
Yeah.
Or I'll promise, well, like right now I'm in this treatment, so I'll promise my technician today I will not kill myself, and I will see you tomorrow.
So tell me a little bit about the TMS. What does that stand for, and what does it do? How's it helping you?
It's transcranial magnetic stimulation. This is the third time I've done it, actually, like the third round. I did it in 2015, like right at the top of, and that's what actually got me back to, I always like to say, like it dropped a ladder down into the hole and then I could climb up. But like I had to do the climbing. There was still a lot of work to be done. Like I wish there was like some magic poof, but it's never been that way for me. But it is essentially, it's like an MRI magnet, and if you Google it, there's tons of stuff on it out there, and it pulses like magnet through your frontal cortex and essentially wakes up the neurotransmitters that a lot of times, like if you do a PET scan of somebody with severe depression, their frontal cortex, their frontal lobes will be pretty dark. Mm-hmm. And so it basically gets things firing again. It kind of does what ECT does, but it doesn't affect the memory. You can go about your day. It can cause headaches.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, but I mean, it doesn't have as high of a success rate as ECT, but it's also a lot newer. But I think the success rate on ECT is still 80%, which I have not done. That was my next that was my next plan if TMS didn't work. But I've been lucky, and it has worked for me.
So as you know, we wrap up a little bit. Do you have anything you would say to somebody who is actively suicidal?
I'm sorry. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. That's the biggest thing, because it's so easy to get so shame-based and think that, oh, well, I just need to think positive. And you know what? When I'm in that space, thinking positive is impossible for my brain. Like, it's not possible. Like, if taking a nap is possible, that's awesome. But, you know, I just continue I find different modalities for healing, because there are so many. And of course, traditional medication, I've been on the whole ride, right? I've done all of it, but I'm always looking into different things that are helping with depression and asking my psychiatrist about it. And I just don't let the suicidal thoughts continue on too long without telling someone, specifically my psychiatrist and my therapist.
Well, so far it's worked, and I'm really happy about that, because
I know I'm still here.
Yes. And I want to thank you for being on today, and for, you know, being so open and honest with us. And I'm sure this conversation is going to help a lot of people.
Thank you, Kelly. It's always great to talk about mental health and give any hope if I can.
And thanks again.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
There we go. Okay, so our next guest is Becca Clegg. She's at Becca Clegg, 2Gs, LPC on Instagram. Becca is a licensed clinical therapist and certified eating disorder specialist who practices in Atlanta, Georgia. I need to mention that her responses are going to be general responses, and they are not to be considered as treatment or personal advice. So let me bring her on. There she is. And she will reply in just a minute.
Hey, Kelly.
Hi, Becca. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Well, what stands out to you about the court's interview?
Courtney's interview. Yeah, a lot of things. And again, I reiterate just how open and honest and brave and in terms of ending the stigma around suicidality. So many things I want to comment on. The last thing she was saying about it not being your fault. Yes, times 1,000. I think there's such a pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality around mental health, unfortunately, that a lot of times people are just shamed into thinking that if they could just think better. And the issue is by the time somebody gets into a place where they're active with a plan and intention, their brains aren't able to think better. And so it's literally an impossibility to just think a positive thought. And oftentimes when you work with somebody who is that actively suicidal, they will say to you, I'm scared. And that's actually an indicator of severity. You know, I don't want to be having this thought. It's almost like the thought is happening to them. So to imply that they could do something about something that isn't them in the first place is insulting, but it also adds shame to an already really difficult situation. So, and then the other thing she said, which is so true, and I always tell my clients is, look, this is a coping mechanism, albeit an unhealthy one, but we are wired to avoid pain. And if you don't think you can get out of a painful situation, you will find an escape hatch. And I think for a lot of people, especially with the chronic suicidal ideation that's just persistent, that's what it is. I remember when I was a kid, I grew up in Southern California near Disneyland, and we used to go all the time. And we'd ride Space Mountain all the time. And as you were in the line, there were always these little doors that you could get out of the line if you got to the point where you were like, I can't, you know, I'm too scared. They call them, like, I don't know what they called them, but I think about it like that. It's like, if you know you can control a situation, and at the end, if it gets too intense, you can control it, it kind of feels better. And I think even though it's scary and clearly suicide is tragedy, the thought that if it gets too bad, I can control it helps people deal with being in it, you know? So she hit on a lot of really, really valid points. And you know, it's just all of the stuff she said.
Well, why do some people go ahead and take the step and, you know, attempt to end it all? What triggers?
I can't answer that. And I think that the reason is it's because for each particular person, their reasoning and or their state of cognitive sort of disturbance is different. You know, what I will say is nobody's doing this because they want to. There's nobody that's doing this because they think this is a great idea. I think that the variables are different for different people. Their level of cognitive distortion and or emotional distress is different. What they have in terms of that, like, life worth living, like Courtney talked about her son and her husband, and things that like are sort of depending on her are different. People's access is different. Not everybody can access a therapist or a psychiatrist. In our culture, like, people don't have those resources. So socioeconomic differences, I mean, gosh, I could just name variable after variable. Each person clearly is unique, but you know, I think that people just come to a point where their belief the pain is too much versus what they have in regards to coping with it. There's like a shift, sadly.
So those thoughts that everybody's having, should all of them, whether they're just like quick run throughs or they sit with you for a while, are they all serious?
Yes, but if you want to think about it like a continuum, you know, I can say if you're having what we call passive suicidal ideations, which is more about the thought of like life not being worth living, or, you know, I wouldn't care if I woke up in the morning. Clearly those are passive in that you don't have a plan and intent. And when you're assessing suicide, you're looking for plan and intent and a few other variables that are kind of on the assessment. But they're all serious. So I will answer your question with a certified yes. But, you know, lots of people have passive suicidal ideation almost daily, and they live like that. And that's not something that you want to, you know, wish on your worst enemy by any means. It's horrible. But yet they manage to live really satisfying lives, managing the thought as a thought intrusion and sort of knowing what that is. Like, that's my escape hatch. That's whatever you want to call it. You know, when I'm working with a client, I let them name it. But, you know, when it gets to the point where as Courtney was saying, like, I know I've got a plan, like I'm going to act on this. Clearly the severity and the need to be kind of helped and or hospitalized, depending on how severe it is, rises, right? So you kind of slide up and down this continuum of severity, but they're all serious.
We have a comment from Rudy. My family doesn't understand how much pain I'm in. They accuse me of doing this for attention.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people have made that accusation, and I've heard that. And I think, sadly, if somebody doesn't understand depression or mental health, which a lot of people don't, it's almost impossible to use language to explain it to them. It's like, I work a lot with eating disorders, and people just don't understand them, and it's very difficult. So what I would say to you is find people and or your folks, be they online or in person. I know right now we can't really be in person, but don't give up, because there are plenty of people who do, like this community alone, they do understand that the pain is very real. And I'm just so sorry that you don't feel that you have that support in your family system.
Well, one last question. Mm-hmm. What if, say, I notice signs of, suicide, or my friend comes to me and says, I'm feeling this way. Is it dangerous for me to talk to them about it? I've heard that you don't want to put thoughts in their head.
I would say no, it's not dangerous for you to talk to them. I mean, one of the things I think that keeps people away from acting on suicide is feeling connected and feeling attached to something here on earth, a relationship being the strongest of that. So no, please talk to them and treat them like they're a human, because they are, first and foremost. The suicidality is secondary to that. But I would say that you certainly don't want to be asking them specific questions. What you want to do is help them to get professional help. And by that, I mean finding a therapist, finding you worst case scenario, and like the most acute moment of crisis, you can go to an emergency room and or call 911. But helping them find somebody who can help them is really important. It's not your job as a friend to do a suicide assessment, but certainly figuring out where they are with that, and just helping whatever you can do to get them into a place where they do feel supported by someone who understands the different levels. That's really where you could be most helpful.
I think you just answered a question for Electric Bill. He said, I have a few friends that are in the danger zone. I have gone on midnight, come save me calls. I'm not qualified. What do I do? So you're saying his job is to get that person to qualified help.
That's what I would do. Yes, I will come over, but we're going to put together a plan and or an action plan. And I understand if it's in the middle of the night, you can't probably find a therapist, but if it's severe, you can take them to the emergency room. And if it isn't, it's like, we're gonna come up with names. We're gonna, if you want to play that role with your friend, then you can do that, but make it really clear that sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I thought it was the connection.
Yeah.
Well, Becca, thank you so much for being on today. You've been, really helpful, and your website is Rebecca Clegg.
Yeah, it's my name, RebeccaClegg.com, but I go by Becca. So my Instagram handle is Becca Clegg LPC. Just Becca Clegg LPC. So yeah, you can find me there, and I have a blog. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on today. Hope to talk to you again.
Yeah, me too. Okay. Thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Okay, so if you're in need, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline is 800-273-8255. I'm also at the HealthyPlace.com website. Click up on resources on the nav, and it will give you access to lots of suicide information and helpful hotline numbers. So I hope you found today's information helpful. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another Healthy Place Instagram Live. Follow us at HealthyPlace for daily updates. And thank you for being here.